cold out there, froze to the bone. So I'm in the shop fixing the snowblower. I'm not going to tell you what happened. I'm just welding it back together. And they're asking for feedback from me, wondering what is going on. So typically what I'm hearing is beekeepers explaining to me how the colonies were looking good. They treated in the spring, produced some honey in the summer, going into fall, monitoring like we're supposed to, monitoring low mite counts and such, applying a treatment, and all of a sudden, later on in fall, their mite counts started to escalate. And they started to panic, so they switched on into different treatments and hammered them with an alternative treatment, and knocked their mites down, and colony condition seemed to be holding until all of a sudden the colony cluster just collapsed. And the colonies either went into winter dead or very small. And as they go through winter, they just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. What I'd like to do is provide just a little perspective in regards to my train of thought in regards to what's going on. And what I'd like to do is use Randy Oliver's mite model, because I think it does a very good job in just laying out the case. So here we are. We have the mite model from Randy Oliver's website. And these are mite counts across the bottom of the graph. Mite count on half cup of bees. So I guess we're assuming 1 represents a 0.3% of infestation, that 3 represents a 1% infestation, and so on. Typically, traditionally, as we've been beekeeping over the last number of years, using Apivar as our mainstay mite treatment, a lot of beekeepers would, let's say April 1st, put in an Apivar treatment, get a 95% efficacy, and it would result in pretty good mite control throughout the entire season. We're seeing a little bit of escalation in the fall. So, I used to get like let's say a 99% efficacy, and I didn't have to hardly do anything right out through into the fall. We're looking at like a 1% or 1.2% infestation late in the fall. So one treatment used to, pretty much be all we needed to do. That spring treatment decreased in efficacy after a little while, and I found my mite counts escalating to a point where I had to do something, getting around that 3%, which, my threshold's around that 2 or so. So then I follow up in the same September with maybe a formic, knock them down. There you go. Or what I used to do is I used to follow up with a oxalic acid treatment later on in fall when the colonies become broodless, and knock them right down for winter. What has been going on here is this efficacy, I think, has dropped. Let's just put 50 in here. And what's going on here is the beekeepers not being as aware of the effect the treatment is having on the varroa mites. I think I'm going to stop things right there, because what I'm talking about right now isn't exactly being shown within the graph itself. There's not flaws, but there's just some circumstances that aren't being reflected in all that modeling that is actually happening within my yards. Last night I was playing around with this on my membership side, just kind of, walking through some train of thought. And this morning I took that and I was trying to condense it down into something that just trying to condense my train of thought into something that made sense. And the more I edited, the more I noticed that what I was saying
And what was being shown on the graph wasn't making sense anymore. So there's some inconsistencies and some inaccuracies to my observations to that graph. So I'm going to actually up a little bit earlier on only my second cup of coffee this morning. And instead of bullshitting on Facebook, I figured I would go down to my office, get onto the spreadsheet again, and see if I can tweak some of the rules or some of my observations to better reflect in the modeling and see if that better exhibits what I've seen within my colonies this last year and what other beekeepers have seen, what they're telling me they've been seeing over this last year, especially over this last year. There's something different that's happened this last season that seems to have caught beekeepers off guard. And whether or not that's just a matter of fact of our treatments not working the way we assume they're working, be it the chemical treatment or even our alternative treatments, which is probably the case, as this graph shows, and no efficacy results in dead colonies. And when we put a treatment in, especially in the spring, and we're not seeing the efficacy, it's reflected very, very, very slowly as compared to observing efficacy in the fall, where we're basically losing our brood nest and the condition of the colony pretty much shows its cards. It's just that whole showing of the cards part that I have in question. Let me see what I can do to maybe help reflect this modeling more to what I've seen over the last season.
I've played around with the modeling, and I customized the spreadsheet the best I could to reflect more of an immediate representation to what I am seeing here in my operation. And boy, the whole, the dynamic of this spreadsheet and all the information input and variable input data, it just everything that Randy's provided here is a lot. And I'm not able to customize a certain aspect of it, which is probably in there, hidden in all the abilities to plug and play, but I haven't found it yet. But I'll show you what I'm talking about here. We want to go to this one here. So yeah, so here is, okay, so here is the modeling that I've been working on right now. Whereas, let's put in a treatment in the spring, April 1st, and it's not working, 50% efficacy. And then later on in the season, you see the growth in the varroa mites. Putting in another ineffective treatment in, middle of August, let's say 50% efficacy, and then just watching the ultimate demise of the colonies. There's a lot of, duh to this, right? Like if the treatment's not working, we're assuming some of these treatments aren't working, then we should assume that we're going to see ultimate demise of our colonies. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is we as beekeepers are applying these products and we're making assumptions on the efficacy of these products based on testing procedures that give us bad data, or it gives us information that doesn't totally reflect the situation at hand. And what I mean here is, look at our treatment that we put in April 1st. And let's say we're putting down that Aprovar treatment and it's only providing us 50% efficacy. Well, we're testing the efficacy of that treatment in there. And as we look all the way through spring, we're seeing like a 0.3. That's in our alcohol shakes. And me and any other beekeeper look at that saying, oh yeah, things are under control. We got things figured. But you look down in the mite population numbers and you see an escalation of mite count all the way up into July, all the way into August. And we're looking at August, so the counts going from that treatment that we put in on April 1st, being 176 mites, only getting a 50% reduction on them, ending up, let's say, middle of August, just about 3,000 mites. And what I haven't been able to tweak on this spreadsheet is at this point of time, we are seeing sheets of brood, and we aren't shaking 3% mite counts at that time with this severity of mite infestation. My argument is it stays down at 1, 1, 1, 1, all the way down. Like I'm shaking all summer into the fall, and I'm seeing very, very low mite counts in my shakes. I'm not seeing the escalation like it's being showed here. And this is what I'm hearing from other beekeepers reflecting on what they've seen is like, well, we put our treatments in, we're monitoring, and we're seeing low mite counts. Things are working. So that puts them in kind of like a frame of mind of managing in a certain way. Like we're going through July, ending off the honey flow in August, middle of August, shaking. And hell, I was shaking Labor Day on September. I was shaking below 1%. And that puts you in a frame of mind where, things are under control. We can maybe adjust my management schedule to more of a lighter weight tight treatment regime. Where if we were seeing like the over 3% that's shown here in this graph, there's a problem here. We have to address it. We have to bring in a little bit heavier guns, right? So what we're seeing is that 1% or one mite, all the way to September with that 3,000 or whatever number of mites within the brood. And then in September, as our brood nest emerges and that queen, slows down her brood rearing, we have that explosion in mite counts. And that's where I think we'd see more of a dramatic up in the line, where September's it'd be down there on that 0.3 counts, 1%. And then middle September, straight up. It should be straight up to that, over 10% counts. And that is what beekeepers are telling me they're seeing. They're seeing situations under control, and then all of a sudden catastrophic. This little exercise I'm doing here is really reinforcing the importance to have a proper mite control in the spring. I'm actually figuring, like, let me take this useless treatment out in the fall. There you go. This 50% mite control in the spring results in a dead colony. If we had a 95% control in the spring, it results in, a situation we can manage. It's all about development of those winter bees going into the winter season. When is that development of bees? That's in August. That's in the beginning of September. In our area, we're not seeing a whole lot of development past middle September through in October. It's very small, if anything. So we're focusing on a point of time which we need low mite counts. And that means low mite counts through the summer period into the fall time period. And we are not able to achieve any type of mite control in the summer season because we're so busy with honey flow and we can't treat with boxes on anyways. So that means as a beekeeper, if we want to keep these bees alive, we need to focus the primarily all of our treatments in the spring and then use the fall period to lower or mop them up, not control them. It's too late in the fall already. We have to do it in the spring before the honey flow. So in our area, that means we have to do it between April and end of June. I think I'm going to have to get a little more strict on treating in the spring time and time again, because as you can see here, let me change that mite control back down to 50%. If I put a mite control product in that's only 50%, I'm lulled through the spring season thinking that mite treatment worked. into July, probably not even testing my colonies at the point of going into honey flow because I'm already assuming everything's under control. But you can see the escalating mite numbers within the mite population already in July. And this is the point of time when the mite growth explodes. And by the time I get another chance to treat, which will be the middle of August to September, I'm already 3% up to around that, 5% count in September, and then escalating into a catastrophe. So, as a beekeeper, I'm going to have to apply more treatments more often in the spring. Let's say a beekeeper here in June puts a formic treatment, and let's say the formic acid works really well. So we put let's say that Apivar treatment in, 50%. We thought is controlling more, but no, it's not. Actually, let's take that right out. Let's pretend we're not taking that treatment in at all. And we decide we're going to put an oxalic acid treatment in at that time instead. 75% or whatever, which is still not good enough. I mean, it gets us into September, but much the same way. And we go into June and we start a formic acid treatment. And let's say it works. Bingo. We're going into September, into October, at the highest into October there at 2% or so, about that, which is decent. It's something we can work with, which we can then throw in as the nest is becoming broodless. Throw in some oxalic acid treatments here and knock them right down. It's just a save face, bring them right down to zero. So then the cluster that has been established on the low mite count is able to winter properly. So that treatment in June is very important, but we fool ourselves sometimes by, is this treatment actually working? Let's say it hasn't. Let's say that formic treatment in June didn't work. We're only seeing a 25% efficacy. How the hell are we supposed to figure out whether it worked or not? Because when our shakes afterwards, we're shaking like 0.3s and probably zeros in those counts too. Where you look at the mite population along the bottom, it hasn't adjusted a whole lot. It's pretty much the same. It's just a reduction of 25%. Yet, how are we supposed to figure this out as a beekeeper? If the procedures we have in hand to monitor the mite counts, to monitor the efficacy of the treatments is inaccurate, how are we supposed to determine if the treatments worked or not? We need more information. And the alcohol wash isn't giving us enough information. We're going to have to compound the alcohol wash with sticky boards, I guess, maybe, just to see how many mites are dropping. But that only tells you if the mites are dropping. If they're not dropping, then like if you start the treatment not knowing how many mites are in there, then you end the treatment not knowing how many mites in there, how are you supposed to figure out how many mites are in the colony? And if you see some drop, but you don't know how much that drop actually represents, then that information is garbage, absolute garbage. So we have to investigate a little bit further and develop some kind of a procedure or technique that allows us to determine exactly what the infestation levels are within our nests. So we can have a pre-treatment and a post-treatment and then determine, okay, this is our number that we have within the nest, and this is what our predicted growth is going to be. So do we need to add another treatment or not another treatment? Because with all these treatments, we add consequences to the, the treatment's going to hurt the colonies. So we just don't want to compound this nest with 25% efficacy formic, 25% efficacy formic, 25% efficacy of formic, and then not have a whole hell lot of difference at the end of it, right? Let's say you only did formic there, and you're not getting the efficacy with the formic as you think you are. Then all of a sudden you have dead colonies all the same. And I would adjust Randy Oliver's mite modeling here to where we see a little spike like that to what is 23? Like that's over 7%, right? Yeah, 7.6% as being red, as being dead. I mean, the colony won't have collapsed, and it was able to be salvaged with those oxalic acid treatments to bring the mite counts down. But that colony in the winter shed or any wintering in any type of winter configuration will have that nest shrink, 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 and it opens up the opportunity for it to ultimately die. My threshold is 2.5. So that's my argument here. And this is what I think beekeepers are seeing, is just the ineffectiveness of some of the treatments we're putting in. And we're making assumptions that the treatments are working, whereas they're not, or they're only partially working, especially with some of these organic acid treatments where it's very variable for the conditions. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? And then with the treatments, we also have those consequences. So just the incomplete amount of information we're basing our decisions on is what's killing our colonies at the end. We think things are working at the front end, but really it's not. And this is what has happened this last season. We thought things were in control, but it wasn't. And by the time we figured things out later on in the season, it's too late. Lights out. So, at any rate, that's just a little of my thought process in regards to what happened last season. The obvious as being the treatment's not working. It's just the whole act of the beekeepers being unaware that the treatments weren't working, and we weren't able to respond accordingly because we didn't have enough information at hand to be able to make better treatment decisions.